country. Joining us now is Independent Senator Angus King of Maine. He's a member of the Armed Services and Intelligence Committees. He was also part of the bipartisan delegation that attended the NATO summit in Lithuania. Senator, thanks for joining us. I was struck when you look at the entirety of the summit, White House officials feel very good. But President Zelensky's tweet on his way there really kind of threw things off for a day. How do you think it ended overall?
I think it ended very positively all around. NATO has never been more unified in 50 years. And plus, 2 new members, including doubling the border with Russia when you have Finland and Sweden. I think it was an extraordinary diplomatic success. Now, you know, put yourself in Zelensky's shoes. He's fighting a war. He's got people being killed on his home turf. So he wants to get as much as he can get and as strong as he can be. But I think in the end, he realized that what's really important is the aid that's coming, the military, the weapons, the material, the support, humanitarian support, rather than what are in the documents of NATO. So I think that's why he went away somewhat mollified.
The issue of cluster munitions, President Biden signed off on them shortly before heading over to the NATO summit. Our Wolf Blitzer was asking the Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, about them, defended the decision, rationalized the decision as well. What's your sense of the necessity of them at this moment?
Well, I got to first say that my initial reaction was negative because of the history of cluster munitions. The danger of cluster munitions is, think of an artillery shell that shoots hand grenades. It's not one big explosion, it's all these things that go out. And so the danger is unexploded ordnance that a child might walk over years later. However, here's number one, the Russians are using them big time. And it's a very dangerous and destructive weapon of war. So the idea of no cluster munitions on the ground in Ukraine, that's gone by. The Russians are using them. Secondly, we're trying to dislodge the Russians. This is a very important weapon. Finally, the Ukrainians themselves are the ones that will suffer whatever negative consequences, and they want them. Because to them, and I think one of the Ukrainian generals said this, the danger of cluster munitions is much less than the danger of the Russians and what they're doing to our people. So I came away convinced after talking to a number of military people. And a final point is the danger of cluster munitions is the dud rate. How many don't go off? It's classified, but the dud rate of what they're being supplied is very low. So the risk is diminished. Plus, the Ukrainians have gotten very good at demining and finding these things. They have groups that are going out every day to deal with landmines, which the Russians have planted, in addition to any issues of cluster munitions. So that's a long way of saying tough decision, but I think the right one, given the fact that the Ukrainians themselves said we need these to defend ourselves.
Several of your colleagues have concerns related to U.S. selling F-16s to Turkey. Do you believe those concerns will be mollified?
I do, and I think that's also an important and a difficult decision. These aren't easy decisions. On the other hand, Turkey is now agreeing to the admission of Sweden to NATO, which is a very important step and one that very few of us predicted going into this weekend. I was flying to Vilnius, and that was the major discussion on the airplane: is what is Turkey going to do? Well, President Biden pulled it off, along with Jens Stoltenberg, the head of NATO. And I'm sure the F-16s were part of that agreement. Erdogan is a transactional kind of guy.
I do want to ask you that we have news over the course of the last several days about a suspected Chinese hack of U.S. government email systems, including targeting Secretary of Commerce Gina Raimondo. You are very integral in the discussions related to cyber. You're on the Intelligence Committee. What's your understanding of the scale and extent of the attack?
Well, I got to be careful about classified information, but it appears to be, number one, state-sponsored by the PLA, the People's Liberation Army of the Chinese Communist Party. Number two, it appears to be extensive. Number three, it certainly is deliberate. If all of those are true, China's got to pay a price. One of the problems with our cyber response over the years has been that there's been no response. Remember the Sony hack?
Right.
Nothing ever happened. And I believe we have to be resilient, we have to defend ourselves, but ultimately, state actors and others who will attack us in cyberspace have to pay a price. There has to be
Have you talked to White House officials or administration officials about in this specific case? I know
not about this.
endlessly.
No, not about this specific case. But I can assure you, they know very well about my concern about essentially it's deterrence.
Right.
And when you get an attack like this, that's a failure of deterrence. That means they're not really worried about getting a response. We have to demonstrate to them that we have the capability to mess with them in a way that will cost them, and that's what's going to ultimately make them decide not to do it. I want in the Politburo or the Chinese Communist Party somebody say, hey, boss, maybe we better not do this because, you know, they can whack us in cyberspace. And so I think that's, I'm looking for a response from the administration.
We don't have much time left, but I do want to ask you, what breaks the logjam with Senator Tommy Tuberville and his blockade related to military promotion?
I don't know because
So you don't see an end.
I don't, because people are talking about, you know, we had a meeting of the Armed Services Committee. We talked about the issues that he's concerned about. There were votes on the issue that he's concerned about. I don't know. I don't know how we break that, but it's really harming our readiness. I interviewed a general yesterday who's going to be the chief of staff of the Army, we hope. And I said, is this compromising national security? You know what he said? Yes. And so, I just wish Senator Tuberville would, he's backed himself into a corner, but I wish he'd find an off-ramp. People are trying to find an off-ramp, but we can't give in to this, what amounts to hostage taking.
Senator Angus King, independent of Maine, thanks for your time, sir. Appreciate it.